I could feel the tension in the air before I even walked through the door. The smell of roasting turkey and simmering gravy drifted from the kitchen, mixing with the sharp, biting chill of the fall evening. My dad was already in his usual spot in the living room, sitting in his big leather chair, reading the paper like nothing ever changes. I set the table quietly, making sure the napkins were folded just right, the forks lined up perfectly. It was a little like therapy, these small tasks that let me tune out the constant background noise of family expectations. Not that I could avoid it for long. You know, Mark's still trying to figure things out, I heard my dad say, his voice rising over the hum of a TV show in the background. I could tell by the way he said it, casual but a little too loud, that it wasn't the first time he'd said it. I didn't have to turn around to know he was talking to Sean. He's, still freelancing, right? Sean's voice followed, cool and detached, like it always was when he was talking about me. The sound of his footsteps was sharp as he crossed the room. Yeah, but, a real job. Just something to get back on track. Anything at all, really, my dad said, dismissing my work like it was something he couldn't even bother to understand. The words stung, but I was used to it. They wanted me to go back to a 9 to 5, something that fit into their neat little world, but that world never made sense to me. Sean laughed, his deep voice full of that superiority I knew so well. Guess it's tough when you don't have a plan, huh, Mark? I didn't respond. What was the point? Instead, I kept setting the table, placing the spoons next to the knives with as much precision as I could muster, pretending not to hear the subtle mockery in his tone. It didn't surprise me anymore. Then, I heard the unspoken words, an exchange of glances between my dad and Sean. It was the look they always gave each other, the one that said everything about what they thought of me. I was a disappointment, a screw-up who couldn't find his way. They were wrong, but it didn't change anything. The words would never stop, and neither would their expectations. At least not tonight, not here. Dinner was almost ready. The questions, the comments, the judgment, they could all wait. I had the table to finish, and for a few minutes, it was just me and the silverware, nothing else. I wasn't even halfway through setting the last plate when the first knock came at the door, followed by a chorus of greetings. I didn't need to look up to know what was coming. The same questions, the same looks, the same shallow attempts to connect. "Aunt Marlene, Uncle Tom," my dad's voice boomed from the front hall. "You made it." It was like he had a script, like every interaction was rehearsed to perfection. I focused on the glasses in front of me, lining them up so they all faced the same direction. Each click of the silverware was louder than the last as the noise around me grew. The door opened and I heard the usual chatter of, "So good to see you," and "You look great," even though the kitchen smelled like gravy and rosemary. It was all I could do to stop myself from choking on it. The first wave of relatives came in, and the questions started immediately. "So, Mark," Aunt Karen said, her voice that weird mix of polite and nosy, "what's new with you these days?" I shrugged and kept my eyes on the table. "Oh, just the usual. Freelance work, still figuring it out." My mom chimed in, like she was reading from a script she'd memorized years ago. "He's doing freelance consulting now. Still figuring it out." Her smile was too wide, a little forced. I saw Sean walk in, dressed in a sharp suit, like he'd just stepped out of a business meeting. His eyes swept over me for a second before he turned to shake hands with the relatives. He didn't even have to ask what I was doing. He already knew, but Joe, my old childhood friend, was behind him, and he didn't waste any time. "Hey, man," Joe said, walking up to me with a smile. He had that polished CEO look now, dark blazer, tight pants, and the confidence of a guy who made 6 figures and never had to wonder where his next paycheck would come from. "You still doing those projects with the nonprofit?" I tried not to let the bitterness show. "Yeah, just some consulting work here and there." He raised an eyebrow, then nudged me like we were still back in high school. "I don't know, man. You're falling behind, huh? Everyone's moving up, and it's like you're just treading water." I didn't know what to say to that. My throat felt tight. I could feel the eyes of the others shifting toward me, like they were waiting for me to explain myself, to make it sound like I had a plan. But I didn't. I had a life that didn't look like theirs, and that was becoming harder to ignore. "Sean's doing great, though," my dad said loudly from across the room, like he could sense the tension in the air. "Just got that promotion. Really proud of him." Of course my brother had just gotten a promotion. I didn't need him to say it again. But there it was in front of everyone, thrown down like a trophy. My dad always knew how to deflect. The small talk flowed, but it felt like a flood to me. drowning me out with its shallowness. I felt the weight of the questions that followed. What was I working on? What was my plan? Like I was under interrogation. Every word my family said was just another reminder that I didn't fit in here, didn't measure up. I kept my head down, hoping the conversation would move on, but it didn't. I excused myself under the guise of getting a drink from the kitchen, needing a break. As I turned the corner to the hallway, I heard my dad talking quietly to Sean. "We just need to find a way to get Mark back on track," he said, his voice low but clear enough for me to hear. "It's like he's spinning his wheels. Maybe if he gets some real work." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. My heart skipped for a second and I didn't move. I could feel my blood rushing in my ears, but I stayed frozen, listening as my dad continued, not realizing I was right there. "Maybe if he takes something, even part-time, it'll give him some structure," my dad suggested. I clenched my fists, feeling the heat rise in my chest. But I didn't move, didn't say a word. What was the point? They saw me as a failure, and no matter how much I tried to explain, they'd never get it. I don't remember the exact moment I sat down at the table, but I knew I was at the far end, out of the way, where the chatter wouldn't reach me too easily. The heavy clink of silverware, the low hum of voices. It was like a dull buzz in my ears. My family, always too loud, too busy talking, too focused on the surface of things to ever notice what wasn't being said. Sean was already in the spotlight, his face lit up as he recounted the details of his recent vacation to Italy. "We met the mayor of Milan," he said with a laugh, clearly savoring the attention. "Real big shot. I think it's who you know. His wife Rachel nodded enthusiastically. "It was incredible. All these important people, you wouldn't believe it." Of course, it was always important people with Sean. He didn't need to say it, but the message was clear. He had it all. The career, the connections, the life everyone else should want to emulate. And here I was, pushing peas around my plate, waiting for it to be over. Then, Uncle Rob, with his booming voice that always seemed just a little too proud, leaned back in his chair. "Some people just can't handle real responsibility," he said, his gaze flicking over at me. The words hit me, sharp, cold. I didn't look up, but I could feel it, the weight of that sentence, the way he said it as though it wasn't even up for debate. It didn't even matter that he hadn't directly addressed me. I knew who he was talking about. Everyone did. I tried to ignore it, but it was like they all had a script in their heads, one where I was a failure just waiting to be fixed. Mom, bless her heart, tried to steer the conversation away. "Mark's been helping out with some of the family charity work," she said, her voice too bright, like she was trying to fill in the gaps. I could hear the strain in her words. She didn't understand what I actually did. She didn't get it. Uncle Rob made a little sound, like he was humoring her. "Charity work, huh? That's nice, but is that really going anywhere?" And that was it. That moment when the room just shifted. I could feel my chest tighten, the heat rising in my face. They didn't even understand the work I was doing, but they sure had a lot of opinions about it. The buzzing, the talking, the judgment. It was all too much. I didn't want to be here anymore. I didn't want to hear it. I had barely finished drying my hands when Aunt Linda appeared in the kitchen doorway, the same concerned look on her face that I'd seen 100 times before. She was smiling, but it was the tight, pitying kind of smile that only made everything worse. "Mark," she started, her voice soft, like she was trying not to hurt me, but I knew better. "Can we talk for a minute?" I set the dish towel down, not sure if I wanted to hear what was coming, but knowing I wouldn't be able to escape it. "Sure, Aunt Linda, what's up?" She stepped in closer, her perfume a little too strong, and I could see the wheels turning in her head as she chose her words carefully. "You know, sweetie, I've been thinking about you a lot lately." I braced myself. This was always the precursor to one of her lectures. I want you to think about getting a part-time job, something with structure. It might help you get back in the game." She glanced around the kitchen like she was searching for the right words to make this sound like good advice. "You know, some of your old friends from high school, they've really got their shit together. It might be good for you to have some responsibility, something small, just to get your feet under you again." I swallowed hard, keeping my face neutral. She wasn't wrong. Most of my old friends had real jobs, families, lives that looked like the ones my parents wanted for me. But the way she said it, like I needed a retail job to fix whatever was wrong with me, was a punch to the gut. It was like she couldn't even fathom what I'd actually been doing. "Thanks, Aunt Linda, but I'm fine," I said, my voice more clipped than I meant it to be. "I'm working, just not the way you're used to." She didn't take the hint. Of course she didn't. Aunt Linda never took the hint. Maybe something to build some confidence back, Mark. You could start small, just a few hours a week. It's not about the job itself. It's about getting structure back in your life. I wanted to scream. I have structure. I've got a whole damn career you don't even understand. But I just nodded and forced a smile. I've got it covered, I said, though it came out flat. Really? Aunt Linda didn't let up. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing like she was trying to fix me with some kind of magic she thought she had. I'm just worried, hun. I know it's tough, but you've been hiding for a while now. Hiding from life. You need to step out of that shell, and that word, hiding, was the final straw. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Hiding? I repeated, my voice too loud in the small kitchen. You think I'm hiding? Aunt Linda looked taken aback, like I had slapped her. I didn't care. Don't act like I haven't been working, I snapped, my hands shaking as I wiped them on my jeans. The non-profit projects I've been involved in, those aren't just some side hustle. We've built water systems in villages, helped hundreds of thousands of people across the world. You think a part-time job at a store is going to help me? She opened her mouth, probably to apologize or offer more well-meaning advice, but I couldn't listen anymore. I didn't want to hear it. I couldn't stand it. Without waiting for her to respond, I turned on my heel and walked out of the kitchen, my feet heavy with frustration. I could feel Aunt Linda's eyes on my back, and I knew my mom was watching too, probably exchanging one of those looks they always gave each other, like I was some kind of project that wasn't quite working out. I made my way back to the living room, where everyone was still gathered around the table, talking, laughing, oblivious to the fact that the real conversation, the real me, wasn't going to be part of this dinner. I tried to ignore the way Aunt Linda and Mom exchanged worried glances behind me, but it was impossible. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was just a disappointment, someone they didn't really know or care to understand. I'd been part of their family for years, but I wasn't one of them. I couldn't take it anymore. The weight of their expectations, the constant judgment, everything was crushing me. Just as I was about to turn around and walk back out of the room, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I fished it out, expecting a work email or maybe a reminder about a project. But when I saw the name of my assistant, Maya, flashing across the screen, I answered immediately. "Mark, you're on CNN," she practically shouted into the phone. "They're doing a segment on your global health work. Your face is all over the news. They're talking about the water projects in Africa. You're everywhere." I froze. The phone felt heavy in my hand, like it was suddenly tethered to something bigger than I could manage. I turned slowly, instinctively walking toward the living room, and held the phone up so my family could see the news anchor's face on the screen. Breaking news: Mark Chandler, a humanitarian known for his work with global organizations, has been recognized for his efforts in building sustainable water systems in developing nations. Chandler's leadership in infrastructure projects has provided access to clean water for over 1 million people. The room went silent. I could hear the newscaster's voice, but it was drowned out by the sudden rush of my family's disbelief. Sean was the first to speak, though his voice sounded off, like he didn't know whether to laugh or ask if this was a joke. "Wait, what?" he muttered under his breath, his eyes glued to the screen. Dad sat forward in his chair, squinting at the TV, trying to make sense of what was happening. His mouth opened like he was about to say something, but the words got stuck. Even Uncle Rob's usual smirk disappeared, his eyes wide with confusion. The anchor kept reading off my accomplishments, about the partnerships with international NGOs, the recognition from the UN, the way my work was changing entire communities. And all I could hear in my head was the sound of their assumptions crumbling. This is Mark," Dad said slowly, as if trying to process it. The disbelief was clear in his voice, but there was something else there too. Doubt, maybe, or maybe just the sting of wrongness. I didn't say anything right away. I just let the news segment play out, watching their faces twist from confusion to realization, from judgment to something else that I couldn't quite identify. Finally, Sean cleared his throat awkwardly and tried to recover. "Well, that's impressive." He shifted in his seat, avoiding eye contact. "So, I guess all that freelance work you're doing is actually pretty big then, huh?" I nodded, feeling a cool calm wash over me. "Yeah, I've been consulting with global organizations, working on large-scale infrastructure projects. That's the reality of what I do. I could feel the weight of their gazes on me, each one shifting from disbelief to something else, something I couldn't quite name. But, Sean's voice faltered for a moment. Could you, get me in touch with some of those people? You know, the ones you're working with? Maybe they could help me out with, my own career stuff. And just like that, I understood. It wasn't about respect. It wasn't about them realizing how wrong they'd been about me. It was about my brother wanting to use my connections to advance his own career. That was all this had ever been about. I looked at him, holding his gaze a little longer than I usually would. My mind raced, but I kept my voice steady. Sure, Sean, I can get you in touch with them, but it won't be the same as just walking into a meeting because you know someone. They work with people who actually do the work, not just talk about it. Sean shifted in his seat, his eyes flicking to my dad, who was still staring at the TV, his face unreadable. It was like he was stuck in a loop, still trying to figure out how to process it all. I stood there for a moment longer, letting the silence stretch out before I slowly turned away, heading for the door. "Mark," my dad called after me, and I paused. I don't know what to say. I didn't look back. "You don't have to say anything. Just think about it next time." I left the living room without another word, feeling lighter than I had in years. The weight of their judgment didn't matter anymore. They had their version of me. Now I had mine, and that was enough. The evening dragged on in the way family gatherings always do when the air's thick with things left unsaid. Everyone else eventually found something to talk about. Sean talking about his next promotion, Aunt Linda mentioning a new vacation spot, my mom and uncle chatting about recipes. But I could barely hear them over the pounding in my chest. The moment felt like a finality, like everything had been set in motion and there was no going back. I grabbed my coat from the back of the chair, trying to keep my movements calm, even though I felt like I was suffocating. My dad and mom stood by the door, looking at me with expressions that were caught somewhere between concern and something else I couldn't name. "You're leaving already?" my dad asked, his voice low. There was no anger, no rage, just a quiet confusion that had been there all night. It was like he still couldn't quite process the truth I'd dropped on him. I pulled my coat on, shrugging it up to my shoulders. "Yeah, I think I've said all I need to say, Mark," he said, and I could tell he was searching for the right words. "When can we, talk about this more? We need to figure this out." I turned to face him, feeling something inside me snap. I could already hear what he was really asking. "When are you going to do what we want? When are you going to be the son we wanted you to be?" "Dad," I said, my voice steady, "it's already been said. My life is my own now. I don't need anyone's approval to make my choices. And I'm okay with that." There was a pause. I could see the disappointment on his face, clear as day, like it always had been when I made a choice he didn't agree with. But it didn't feel the way it used to. It wasn't crushing anymore. It didn't weigh on me like it used to. It was just his disappointment. I'd come to terms with that. And honestly, I didn't care about it anymore. He stood there, looking at me like he still wasn't sure where to put his feelings. But I wasn't about to stick around for him to figure it out. I didn't need to be there for that moment, the one where he would keep trying to convince me that I was wrong for living my life the way I wanted. Just as I moved to step around him, Sean quietly pulled me aside. His eyes were soft, and there was an awkwardness in his posture that didn't quite fit his usual confident self. "Hey, Mark," he said, low enough so only I could hear. I'm sorry, man, for everything. I didn't get it. I was an asshole." He shifted his weight, like he wasn't sure how to stand in this new version of things. I don't know. I thought you were just lost, I stared at him for a second, letting the words sink in. I didn't know what to say to that. It didn't feel like an apology as much as it felt like an obligation. He was sorry because he had to be. "Don't worry about it," I said, my voice clipped, just enough to let him know that whatever apology he was offering, it didn't matter. Not now. He nodded, looking at the ground, not meeting my eyes. I didn't need him to understand. Not anymore. I turned away from him and walked toward the door. My parents stayed silent behind me, probably still processing everything, but I couldn't wait for them to catch up. I stepped out into the cold night air, the chill cutting through me as I walked toward my car. The weight of everything, them, began to lift. I didn't have to carry it anymore. But as I reached the car, I heard my dad's voice from the doorway, soft but clear. "Mark," he said, his tone quieter than I'd ever heard it. "You've done good, son." I stopped, feeling something inside of me shift. The words weren't what I had expected. They weren't what I'd been waiting for all these years, but somehow they were enough. I didn't turn back around. I didn't need to. I just stood there for a second, letting the wind cut through me, then slid into the car and drove off into the night. For the first time in years, I felt light.